Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight for the Star Paths Invested in Success with my guest, Adam Koós. I'm Amber Gilsdorf with Estrela Consulting, and this is one of our Star Paths webinars where we're going to spend about 30 minutes chatting with someone about their career and their path to get where they are today. So without further ado, we're going to hit the first question. And my first question is, tell us a bit about you, Adam. Where you work, what you do now, anything else like that.
Well, I work at Libertas Wealth Management Group, a company that I founded, I guess, back in 2004, so 21 years ago, believe it or not.
Oh,
Mm. I am a very, very proud husband of my best friend Donna and my two little guys, Karsten and Camden. So that's who I am. I'm trying to remind myself constantly, I am not a business owner. I am a husband and a dad first, right?
yes, yes. I
But
hear that.
I
Work-life
happen
balance.
I run a business though. But so I'm essentially a financial advisor, financial planner, and portfolio manager. So investment management and financial planning.
Okay. So investment, financial planning, and business owner all combined. So you've got a lot of, you wear a lot of hats. How
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah. That's what jazzes me up though. I mean, I didn't even mention that I also own a business transition and exit planning company as well. So we help companies grow and sell as well. So that's not something I ever planned on doing, but
Yeah,
it just kind of worked
you
out.
really do. You have your hand in a lot of different aspects of business and finance. So, did you always want to be a financial planner, or did specific events inspire you?
No, I wanted to be a doctor my whole life. My dad was my hero, still is. He was an optometrist and had his own practice. And I used to come home every day after school, whether it was middle school, high school, and I would, walk home, ride my bike home, and I'd stop at his office and I'd go to his office and I'd sit in his office, in between patients, we would chit chat and talk, and I'd see how much his patients loved him, and I'd see how much his staff loved him and what a great job he did as a doctor and how he helped people. And I just thought, I want to be a doctor someday. And that's actually that's actually what I went to school for. Now, I mean, early on, I learned I didn't want to be an optometrist. I shadowed him for a day, and it was one of the, um, I don't know, I want to call it awkward moments of my life. But when your dad is your hero and you spend your entire day shadowing him, and at the end of the day, you realize how boring his job is, and then you have to tell him that this isn't for me, when he's your hero. So that was a tough day for me. But I was like, God, I don't, all day long to say, is this one better or is that one? What about this one? Is this one better?
Yeah.
Now, what about that one? All day long,
Yeah.
I'm not somebody who likes routine at all. I like things to be different every day, exciting and fast paced. Um, so I went to school to do trauma surgery. That's what I went to school for.
I did. I've known you a while. Spoiler alert to anyone watching, and I did not know that.
That's what I wanted to
So,
do.
I mean, that's definitely more variety than the do you like one or two? That's for sure. So, you had to have some hard conversations with yourself and with your dad. And that led you to trauma surgery. But how did we get from that to now?
Sure. No, oh well, there's a I'll say there's a pit stop in there. So there was going to college, knowing I want to be a doctor, but not didn't know what kind of doctor. I just needed it to be exciting. And then I was on the Ohio State Taekwondo team, and I got injured a lot because that's something you get hurt a lot, in that
Mhm.
sport. And we used to joke that many of us had a permanent room in the ER that we just kind of spent time in. I broke several bones in college, so there was one particular trauma doc that really inspired me, and I thought, "Ooh, this is what I want to do. This is exciting." So I worked at the ER for 3 years at Ohio State, and as a volunteer, and I actually lived in the flight path of the life flight, and I could hear the helicopter coming. And there's a little secret tunnel in the west parking lot of Ohio State where if you park in that parking lot and you go into the tunnel, the elevator will take you right to the trauma rooms. So I used to come over even when I wasn't on shift. I would when I saw a life flight coming, I'd try to rush over and see what was going on. But anyway, what got me into it was to avoid making a very long story. There were some things personally that happened in my life where I tore my hamstring halfway off my pelvic bone. I was always a very, very goal-oriented person, and I really wanted to do well at Taekwondo. And I didn't drink in college at all. I focused on studying and fighting, and that was all I did. And when I was forced to quit fighting and kind of shooting for that goal, I kind of got bummed out and depressed. I don't know. It was almost like Taekwondo is what kept me focused on school, and then I didn't have that focus anymore. And all of a sudden, school and the trauma room and all that stuff, medicine just didn't sound fun anymore. And really, more than anything, going to school for 7 more years didn't sound fun. And
Yeah.
because for those that are watching or listening that don't know, I mean, you go to undergrad 4 years, you go to med school for 4 years, then you go surgical fellowship, you got your residency. It's a long haul and a lot of debt. So
Yeah. Not so much the debt, but it should be a long haul because I don't want to be operated on by someone who, spent 1 year learning how to do whatever the surgery is. So yeah, you should, but a lot of practice to become good at your job.
it should be, right? You don't want your life being saved by somebody who got a 3-year degree in the Bahamas, right? I mean, that's
Right.
probably not.
Absolutely.
I
But
might take
your
my chance.
identity was really tied, like so much of your identity was wrapped up in like being an athlete, and then that was directly tied into being a doctor.
For sure. Yeah, just and all for me, it's always goals, right? It's kind of like earlier when I was saying I'm trying to reframe everything. I'm not a business owner, right? I'm all these other people. I run businesses, I grow businesses, and I help people and make their lives better. But that's not who I am. You know what I mean? So anyway, the end of that story is that I was walking down Neal Avenue at Ohio State, and I was nervously calling my dad to tell him that I was dropping out of the program. And when he picked up the phone, I said, "Hey, I don't want to go to school for 7 more years. I'm dropped. I actually already had called my advisor and dropped out." And he says, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I don't know. I thought about like I like software and computers. So offline, we were talking about how people want to get into technology because that's what's in demand. So I was thinking software. And I was like, I thought about pharmaceutical sales maybe, but then I'd be selling to doctors, and I don't want to do that. And he says, "What do you think about being a financial advisor?" And and I laugh at that every time I talk about it because I always like to tell this story exactly like this because this is the truth. He says, "What about being a financial advisor?" And I say, "A financial advisor?" I said, "Dad, I took one econ class in college." I said, "I don't even know what the ticker stuff is at the bottom of the CNBC screen."
Yes.
And he goes, "Yeah," but he's like, my financial advisor is, really good with the numbers, but he's not as good with people as you are. And he's like,
Yeah.
"You're a smart guy." He's like, you've got that virtual stock exchange account you kind of play around with, but more importantly, he's like, you're good at teaching and educating and making complex things simple and easy to understand. And he's like, I think the profession could probably use, people who are good with people. And he's like, and think of it this way, it'd be like, maybe not emergency surgery, but it's financial surgery. And that's how he framed it.
A wise man. So he saw aptitudes and strengths in you that maybe you weren't necessarily aware of, but was able to, from his own experience with his financial plan, probably realized he's like, "Ugh, we
Yeah.
need some atoms in the field."
Well, I'm 21 years old. They say that boys' prefrontal cortex isn't developed till 24, right?
Yep,
So
yep.
I didn't know what I was doing. I was just aimlessly walking down Neal Avenue.
But we all got a pro tip about a secret tunnel.
Right.
Um, so then where'd you go from there? Like, what next?
Yeah. I met his advisor. I guess there's more to this story. I went and met his financial advisor in Cleveland. And after talking to him, he asked me if I was interested, and I said no. And he said, "Go to this." He worked for Edward Jones, and I said, he said, "Go down to this seminar in Columbus at the Crown Plaza on Bush Boulevard." And he says, "If you're interested, let us know." He's like, "I think that we'll be really interested in you, but if you're not interested, just don't call." And so I went to the seminar, and my big problem with the industry was my perspective was that it was a lot of lack of ethics, a lot of salesy, kind of snaky, greasy, people taking advantage of people because that's what you see in the news when it comes to finance. You see all these people getting in trouble, going to court, going to jail, and I didn't want to be that
Well,
person.
yeah, because the good ones, they're not making the news. Nobody's, seeking you out and saying, "Look at this stand-up citizen who's my financial advisor,"
Should be right, but it's not.
They should. Yeah, I'd
Maybe it
watch
makes
that.
make the profession a little bit more attractive. But so when I went down to the seminar, I found out at this particular brokerage firm, when they hire you, if you make it through the hiring process, you start at home, which is not easy, by the way, especially when you're, 21, 22
Yeah.
years old. But you start working out of your home until you can prove that you can build a business, enough to be profitable. And then
Mhm.
they basically sign a lease for you and get you a place of your own. And then once you're profitable enough, they'll help you hire an assistant. So my perspective of the industry was, the boiler room, Wall Street sales floor with people picking up phones and selling stocks, right? Stock jockeys, as they call them. Where in
Mhm.
reality, in this situation, it was like, look, nobody's going to be over my shoulder telling me to do things I shouldn't do to my clients. Instead, I can be in an office by myself doing things for my clients, to help them.
Yeah.
So I ended up saying
So,
yes. They hired me out of college. Yeah.
wow. So then from there, you had to, I mean, you didn't just go right into financial planning. Did you have to get certain certifications
Sure.
or
Yeah,
things
you
like?
had, and we were talking offline about how complicated this industry is, unfortunately, and it is. But yeah, I had to study, I think 8 weeks. I studied for the Series 7 exam. Then I had 3 days or 2 days to study for the Series 63. And then I took my life health, variable annuity, and long-term care insurance licenses, and all of that was done in probably 9, 10 weeks. So it's a
Yeah.
lot. I mean, you're studying pretty much 8 to 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. You get one day off, and then on top of that, when I was hired, I was told by all these people at the time. The average financial advisor was about 42 years of age, and they would tell me, "Oh, you're going to be a hero." This is summer of 2001. The market's been going down, dot-com bubble, and they're like, "You're going to
Hmm.
be a hero. Market's been going down. All these people are going to hire you. They're just going to make money, and you're going to look great." And then I start on September 1st of 2001, and 11 days later, the World Trade
Yes.
Center goes down, and I'm
Yes.
21 years old. So
Trying to start a business in what at the time, the only thing I feel like I can equate it to is like when COVID first hit and everyone was kind of shell shocked and didn't know like what does this mean? Like that's what the aftermath was for several months.
yeah, yeah. And for me, it was the way I always say it. And I guess this is not practiced, but I've said it so many times, it sounds the same every time when I say it. But I was 21 years of age, eventually in the snow, right? After the World Trade Center goes down, during a market that's precipitously falling, trying to get people 3 times my age to trust me with their life savings.
Sure. I mean, that is a very stacked deck.
Yes. And not one that's for me. It's off-suited twos and threes.
So
Hard
if
players.
we had, it sounds like, I mean, more than anything, one of the skills you specifically see that's needed in the field is like being personable, like being a people, not just a numbers person, which is where I think a lot of students think, oh, I like numbers, I'm good with numbers. But then that personality piece where you have the heart of a teacher, that personality, the warmth that brings your clients in, because that can help maybe supersede some of that age difference.
Think that helped. I think the bigger thing that helped was, before that, I didn't mention that I grew up in a little town called Oberlin, Ohio, and which is an extremely diverse town. And I was not the popular guy. I mean, there was I borderline. I'm not sure what the exact demographics were, but I wouldn't be surprised if I were the minority. The skinny white freckled redhead. So and I was skinny back then. I'm not skinny anymore, but no, I think that I grew up in a town where, when you do the high school yearbook, there was no way I was getting most popular, or you know what I mean. That wasn't happening. I was not getting best athlete, or anything like that. But I was, it taught me to be resilient, and I think that in life and in work especially, that you have to not only work really hard, and I think what you just mentioned is 100% true. But I also think that resilience is crucial. You have to know. One of my early mentors told me, fail fast and move on.
Yeah.
I just
And
want
I
to.
think,
Seth Godin, didn't Seth Godin say the people who fail the most succeed the most? You
Mhm.
just have to try,
Yeah.
right?
Well, yeah, and you learn more from that than you do when you try things and they work, because if it worked, you're not necessarily reflecting on what went wrong. You just like you move on.
Yeah.
Um, so then it sounds like in failing fast, you probably had some rejections from clients who weren't going to take you seriously at that young age in a community where you were, even though you belong there, were kind of an outsider.
Well, I left there and I came to Ohio State. There was plenty of rejection there.
Yeah.
There was fights, right? I mean, physical fights. There was things like that. Um, but in the business life, when I started my career, there was no shortage of rejection, but it was
Yeah.
not like the rejection I grew up with. It was easy. It was
Yeah.
like, if people say no, then so what? What's next? Right?
Yeah. So did you had to take a series of exams. So here we are, fresh out of college, you've been hired, but you have to get the proper certifications to actually work with clients, to handle money. Each of these different exams almost, I think of it almost as like levels you up or gives you more tools to work with when you're advising clients. Is that a more basic way to think about it?
Sure. I would say that gives you a kind of a basis of education for a bunch of things, you know. I think what the saying now is all the things, right? So I mean, the series there's a series 6 which isn't quite the series 7, but the series 7 is like the granddaddy of them all in terms of
Yeah.
everything from stocks to bonds to options and, RSUs and non-qualified stock options and bond durations and all kinds of weird stuff that nobody cares about, but yeah.
So what is like now a day in the life if you're working with a client? Because obviously there's too much to unpack in 30 minutes with going into also managing the business.
Sure.
But if you're working with a client, what is a typical, I guess, not just meeting, but like what are you doing with their money? What does that look like?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. The business stuff can be part two. With the client, um, with a client, like a typical day. I mean, we meet with clients on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. And a typical, with a brand new client, we'll say that'll probably make this easiest. We spend 2.5. Well, we'll spend 30 minutes on the phone talking to them first, kind of like very, very non-threatening. Who are you? What's missing? What are the gaps? Here's who we are. This is what we do and how we work with clients. Answer questions. Do we want to go through the process or not? And then that's it. And if we don't, then we don't. We part as friends. The second piece is a discovery meeting. So if they decide they want to go through the process of financial planning, then it's 2.5 hours, a discovery meeting. It's a very, very long, exhaustive meeting where we're trying to get to know everything about them. We're going to get to know them probably better than most people, even the doctor. And then
Yeah.
we have that information. Then we get into what we call an education meeting. So we're teaching them about how we're structured as a fiduciary, what that means to them and their families, some kind of like investments 101. We talk about our different investment strategies from a 30,000-foot view. We're not trying to make them a pro, right? We just want them to understand on a high level. And then we do a little bit an assessment, to kind of understand how they feel about the markets and risk and their money and, losing money, of course, which inevitably happens sometimes. I always say it, when you lose money, it's temporary unless you're betting against the United States. But I digress. So um, and then the last meeting, or I shouldn't say last meeting, but the last meeting in the process is the financial planning meeting, which is 90 minutes long. And this is where we do all the recommendations, give all the advice, because now we have enough information between the intro call, the discovery meeting, and the education meeting to say, here's where you are. If they're not retired yet, you want to retire here and you want to make work optional at this point. So here
Yeah.
are all the things we need to make that happen. And oh, by the way, you're not properly insured. So we need to get this life insurance in place. And your tax situation is out of whack. So we need to fix this to make your taxes lower. We need to look at, what's life going to look like after retirement? Because, there's this common misperception that, when I retire, then I change all my investments and I make them super conservative. And it's like, well, you're not going to die when you retire. You're going to die a long time from now. So
Right, right. Ideally.
yeah, in a perfect world. So then we get into retirement income planning, which is planning their income after retirement, which is, 30 years of giving themselves a paycheck to supplement
Yes.
Social Security, pensions, what have you. And if they're already retired, the only difference is we just don't have the accumulation part of that equation. We're just talking about how do we make sure that we make this money last and you last longer than your money lasts longer than you do, not the other way
Yeah.
around.
Yes. So if you get in with a family early enough or a client early enough, you're doing the whole thing. You're planning kind of a lifespan.
Mhm.
And then sometimes you get called in as the pinch hitter at the end and you're helping plan more the after working lifespan.
Yeah.
Okay. You really are a financial surgeon.
Uh,
So Well, I mean, you're taking all these different pieces and aspects of a of a personal family financial picture, and you're trying to figure out where's the bleeding and like we got to stop it.
Yeah.
And what can you do to be the most healthy? So, how do you this is one of the questions I've had students ask me, like, how does a financial planner get paid? Like, you're working with other people's money, but how do you make money?
There's a few different ways, and it depends on what where you go, because I'm going to talk to this from the angle of what you do at Estrela.
Mhm.
So, at our firm we get paid differently than say independent, like the LPLs and the Raymond James of the world or the Wells Fargos of the world, and they get paid differently than the Merrill Lynches and Ameriprises of the world, and they get paid differently than say the E Trades of the world. You know what I mean?
Okay.
It's all different. It's convoluted. Unfortunately, it's terrible the way it's convoluted, but it is. So generally speaking, if I broke it down into simplest terms, it would be either A, uh, clients are paying a commission, which is basically like a fee on top of whatever you're buying to buy and or sell investments or insurance or annuities or something like that. So that's one way advisors might get paid. They might get paid a commission up front. They might get paid, something on the back end. They might get paid something ongoing on an annual basis. Second way they might get paid is through a flat fee, like a fixed fee. So it might be a hard dollar cost, meaning like, it's $12,000 per year. And
Right.
maybe that's paid twice a year at 6,000 per, every 6 months. Another way might be hourly, if it's like a project and like, look, I don't want to do a whole full-blown financial plan. Um, I have a property I'm selling and it's a $5 million property and I owe 2.5 million on it, and the other 2.5 million, if I sell it right now, I have to pay capital gains tax. How do I avoid the tax?
Yes.
You might charge
Okay.
a fixed fee or hourly to help them avoid that tax and do what's called a 1031 exchange. So that'd be like a one-off thing. So there's all kinds of different ways
Yeah.
that you get paid, but generally speaking, it's, some firms charge commissions, some charge a percentage of money they manage for you, and that gets billed out of your account monthly or quarterly. Some of them charge hourly, some of them are fixed fee. The way we do it, it's all assets under management percentage or a fixed fee or hourly. We don't do any commissions.
Okay. Gotcha. So that's helpful to know because I didn't know when asked the question by students, I didn't know that the answer is it depends. It
Yeah.
depends who you work for and you know
Yeah.
how that company structures their pay scale.
Yep.
So back to kind of college related. You clearly have already told us that you went to college for something completely different. And I'm wondering in this field, what do you think that going to college for finance matters as because if you can study for these required certifications and have and build a successful business, and clearly companies would hire you. Granted, I realize that was, 2001, but would most people coming out of college without a finance degree who were going to take those series exams and get the proper credentials, could they be hired without a finance degree?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I thought you were going to ask me if they don't have a college degree, could they get hired? And then I would just get opinionated and say that I don't think you should have to have a degree to do this for a living. Personally, I don't I don't think I don't think you should have to go to college to do it. And the proof of that is that I took one econ class, and
Right.
I run a massively successful financial advisory firm, and also, a very ethical one at that, which I think is way more important than being super super smart out of college and knowing all the things. I think that being ethical. My dad told me when I started my company, because I left that brokerage firm and started my company when I was 25 in
Oh,
2004. And I said, what advice do you have for me? Because he was a successful business owner, and he said, just pretend like everything's in tomorrow's front page, and the rest will take care of itself. And so that's kind of how we've grown everything. So I don't think you should have to go to college. I just think you should be a good person with great ethics and morals, that's a hard worker, that has resilience and grit, and then study and work your butt off. That's what I think. But nobody cares what I think. So
no, I care what you think. That's why I'm interviewing you. And that kind of plays into like you just summarized what is like the essentials for going into this field. And I would add, ideally, this is more like like maybe not a must have, but a wish list item would be the people skills. And
sure.
like as you said before, the strength of being able to break complicated concepts down. I mean, this is why people get overwhelmed and they don't work with financial planners because it's all very over. I know my husband, like the minute you start talking numbers, his eyes like glaze over and yeah, so it's interesting to hear all of that. So if you were hiring, well, I think we already know the answer to that, so I'm going to skip that question. What do you wish someone would have told you about this field before you started?
Oh, so like if I had to do it all over again, what would I do?
Yeah, or if you were talking to, like, if you were giving advice to like a college kid or an intern or somebody who just thought, like maybe a high school kid who's thinking about this, like, what do you wish you would have known about the field?
I came into it again so abruptly. It's not like I planned for it, so I don't know that I have any good advice for that college kid that's just getting started. But I think that for the person who's getting started or knows they want to do this for a living, like get into finance or the financial planning field, I know that there's probably two things I wish I would have done sooner. One is very boring, and that is I wish I would have done more delegating and automation and processes and systems. I spent too much time trying to do everything myself,
Yeah.
and there was a control problem there. There was a fear of if I delegated it, then it wouldn't get done right. And what ended up happening is I just ended up working too much. So it was hard to grow, harder to grow than it should have been. So I wish I would have done more delegation and automation and processes and systems. The second thing, which is much more fun, is I wish I wouldn't have been so intimidated by business owners and CPAs. Because when you're 21, 22 years old, you have this perception, this misperception that all these business owners know way more than you do, and
Mm-hmm.
they don't. You have this misperception that CPAs and attorneys, they're way smarter than you about what you're doing because they're older and they're CPAs and they're attorneys and they're smart people, right? And they are smart people, but they don't know more than you about what you're doing. So I wish I wouldn't have been so intimidated so early on, and I avoided business owners and CPAs like the plague, with rare exceptions because I was terrified that I had this like perception I wasn't smart, you know?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I almost put my counselor hat on and was like, let's unpack that, but we can't do that right now. So that changed though, because now your second business is helping plan exit strategies. So clearly at some point you gained some confidence to approach them.
Yeah.
It's worked out
I
well for
think I think that it's probably a personality thing, but I think I'll always have that aversion to feeling like I'm smart. I think it's probably part of where I grew up and like,
sure.
yeah, like you said, a lot to unpack.
It is, yeah, but the balance sheet probably tells you you got some smarts up there. So let's wrap up with two things. We have a question from one of our attendees. So we'll do that and then we'll end on like a cap it off question. Does that sound good?
Sure.
Okay. Question is about college and kind of it was always destined to come up. We do college, you do finance. Here's the question.
Yeah.
Do you help families manage college tuition, paying full tuition, especially, and dealing with debt and coming up with a plan to, maybe a creative plan to pay for college tuition or manage debt?
Yeah. No, we do. We see it usually in the kind of the big expensive degrees, whether that be master's degrees, typically people who went to school to be a doctor, they usually come out with a ton of debt. Um, there's one story, I guess I'll share a quick story and say that, there was this one couple that came to us years and years and years ago, and they'd seen me speak at the American Medical Association downtown, and I didn't even remember them, but they came in like a couple years later after they graduated, and they had signing bonuses. They each got $160,000 for signing bonuses with the place that they were hired,
Yeah.
but they had like $450,000 of debt. And they came in kind of thinking, hey, we got these signing bonuses. We're thinking some emergency money, and then maybe we invest the rest. And given how high the interest rate was on some of their debt, my recommendation was build the emergency account up, pay off the high interest debt, and don't give us any money. Like we'll build a plan for you for now, but let's hold off. And that ended up obviously being well, I shouldn't say obviously because maybe it wasn't obvious, but it ended up being a whole lot better for them long term. And it gave them the ability to get that debt hacked out so that
Yeah.
when the time came that it was paid off, now there was this compounding effect that took place with the extra cash they had to actually start saving for themselves after they drop their tax bill. Because that was the other thing. It's like so many people they come to financial advisors, and again, not all of us are ethical, right? So sometimes they'll go to financial advisors and they want to grow their business, of course, and they want clients. So naturally, some of them are going to have a conflict of interest and want you to put their money your money with them. When oftentimes the best thing is just to fork money into your 401k, 403b, 457, cash balance, like get your tax bill down, right? So
Yeah.
that's what we always recommend. I shouldn't say always, typically we're recommending pay off the high interest debt to a certain percentage. And then we'll build a strategy around that, plus a tax planning strategy for their retirement plan and so on and so forth. But as far as planning tuition and planning, school, if you haven't seen my podcast before, it's called The Retirement Fiduciary.
Yes.
Then Amber has been on it twice at least, I think, if not three times. So I typically defer to Estrella when it comes to the planning side of that fence because they know a lot about, how to get the kid in the trajectory of what makes sense for their talents, their God-given talents, and then from there helping them find the places that offer the most money and free money to scholarships and grants and things like that, so we can keep that bill as low as possible. Because of the biggest mistake that parents and students are making, I think, and I think it's getting better thanks to companies like Estrella, but it's the biggest mistakes they're making is they don't look at it college like an investment. They look at like the something they're supposed to do. They just have to go to college. A, not everybody has to go to college, in my opinion. And
No,
B,
agree.
if you go, you have to look at it like, if I'm going to spend this money, it's got to turn a profit for me. And the profit is, what's your salary going to be? What's your income going to be afterward? And is that commensurate with the cost of the debt at the end of the day?
Yep, the return on investment. And
Uh,
I agree it's getting better. And there is, although, who knows what's to come, but currently there is a little bit more transparency because there are, like Georgetown has their Center for Workforce Development, and they have started putting out charts that show the return on investment of the total cost of a degree at different universities over the long term. They net it out at 10, 20, 30 years, to give people some sense of what that might look like. But like you, we can do our best work surgically if we have our clients earlier in the
Good
process.
time.
Yep.
Yep. You don't want to plan for what you're going to do when you step on a landmine first. Yeah. When you hear
Like,
that click.
so I think let's, sorry, my smoke detector is going off.
Okay.
I
Literally fire. Yeah.
We're back. Um, it was just one beep, so maybe it's just having a moment or a bug flew into it. All right, I digress. So let's cap it off with what did you do right that you feel or believe help you get to where you are today? And
Okay.
a proud moment. Let's hear a proud moment.
Oh, okay. Mom, I feel like what I did right was I used to, when I first started my career, I'd go to mentors. I would always find mentors. Like whether they wanted to work with me or not, I would beg them for their time. I had a lot. I still do. I have a lot of mentors. So I would always tell them that, I'm a car guy. So I would always say, like, I'm like a V10 engine. I'll outwork anybody. I just need the right gas and
Yeah,
just ask them for the right fuel, the right gas. And so I worked harder than I think most probably did. I obsessed about knowledge and learning. I'm always reading. I don't like fiction. I like nonfiction. I always learn it. If I'm not reading something that improves me, I'm not really interested. But yeah, lots of mentors, I guess. That would be it. And then you said
yeah,
proudest moment.
yeah. Proud moment. It could be something that you experienced professionally from like building your business or a moment when you felt like, wow, this is why I do what I do.
Um, I will say, I mean, there's some easy ones. Like I mentioned, I started my company at 25. That's a big one. That's pretty, I mean, at the time, it didn't seem like a big deal. Now it's like, what the hell were you thinking?
Yes. Oh my gosh,
Um,
like any version of our 25-year-old selves, I know, like we had no idea what we were doing. Like,
abandoned, who cares? It's like the founder of LinkedIn said that starting a business is like jumping off a cliff and building a plane on the way down. That's
yeah,
kind of how it felt. I mean, all the awards like 40 under 40, Financial Advisor magazine, being ranked by Investopedia as one of the top 100 most influential advisors in the country is cool. Um,
yeah.
and you know what? The biggest, probably the Better Business Bureau does what they call a torch award for ethics and trust. And
Yes.
still the only financial advisory firm in Central Ohio to have ever won that award. And you can only win once. We always joke we haven't been unethical since then. You can only win it once. But
Right.
yeah, I'd have to say that's it. I could tell you a story too, but we don't have time. I guess that'll be part two.
Yeah, this was lovely and very informative and
Thank you.
hopefully very helpful to anybody who's watching this. And I love that, like, that ethics piece, I think even in my field, like there was the Varsity Blues scandal several years ago. It's like all it takes are a few bad faith actors and
It does.
whole
The
thing.
bad part is they're really good. Some of them are so good at sales. And so you can they're good at building trust, but I will tell to the parents listening or watching, that you've got a righteous kid who's like hell bent on ethics and doing like working his butt off if your kid grew up the whole time and you're telling them life isn't fair. Because that was me. It's not fair. It's not fair.
Yeah.
My dad used to always tell me, well, life isn't fair. You gotta play the game. And it's like, well, I don't want to play the game. It should be
Yeah.
this way, But anyway,
Yeah, you have to learn how to exist within the game that is still genuine and authentic to you, which
something
that's the secret sauce, but that's a tough needle to thread.
gotta be able to sleep at night at the end of the day.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I was just having this conversation today. Well, this was awesome on many levels, one of which was when you were talking about your dad being an optometrist, it reminded me I need to schedule my annual eye exam. So, double bonus, I got to chat with you and have a new to do on my calendar tomorrow. But thank you so much for your time. It is precious, and I cannot be more grateful that you chose to spend a little bit of it with us, sharing insights from your path.
This was a blast. It was fun. So I'm happy to do it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Thank you everyone who's watching live or watching the recording. And check out some of our other Star Paths videos. There's all different careers there. All right.